Well, hello. So glad we have the opportunity to continue our study of the miracles of Jesus. We get the opportunity to continue looking into the growing ministry and the growing understanding of who Jesus is. That's one of the big questions of the Gospels, particularly the Synoptic Gospels, is who is this Jesus? And you see the sense of people growing in their understanding and people beginning to wonder what this man is capable of doing and how he's capable of doing it. And so we got to talk a little bit yesterday about the healing at Nain and how that kind of began to see people as seeing Jesus as a prophet, perhaps even on par with Elijah and Elisha. The miracle we're going to look at today has the disciples start to coming to the conclusion that this Jesus is more than just a prophet. He is, in fact, the Son of God. And so what we're going to look at today is one of the most famous stories of Jesus, and that is Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And so this is recorded for us in all three Synoptic Gospels. It takes place in Matthew chapter 8, Luke chapter 8, and Mark chapter 4. We're going to take a look at Luke's narrative, as we've been kind of doing for the past couple of weeks. And so in Luke chapter 8, we've had a little bit of a time jump from where we've been previously with the widow at Nain story. There's several chapters of Jesus interacting with individuals, of him teaching, but this is the next miracle story in Luke's account. So we've seen Jesus has just finished teaching the parable of the sower. He's been explaining to the disciples why he's been using parables. And Mark tells us that this event that we're about to read about the calming of the sea, this actually takes place pretty much that evening after he's taught. It's been a full day of teaching. It explains why Jesus is going to be asleep during the beginning of this miracle. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what's going on here and see some of the connections that our gospel writers are making. It says in Luke chapter 8 and verse 22, it says, "Now on one of those days, Jesus and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, 'Let us go over to the other side of the lake.' So they launched out, but as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended on the lake. They began to be swamped and to be in danger. They came to Jesus and woke him up, saying, 'Master, Master, we are perishing.' He got up and rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. And he said to them, 'Where is your faith?' They were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, 'Who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?'" And so it's a very brief account, but one of the most incredible miracles that Jesus does. And indeed, all the miracles of Jesus are amazing because they are things only God himself can provide. But this one is particularly powerful. You can imagine the visual element of what this would have looked like. The Sea of Galilee is a pretty big body of water. It's several hundred feet deep. And the way that the land is built in that area is that there's a series of high hills, and the wind kind of funnels through those hills and can actually whip up pretty strong gale force winds. And so these waves, they could have been 8-10 feet tall. And so you can imagine kind of a shallow bottomed Galilean fishing boat. Those waves would just be crashing over the boats. And in fact, one of the other accounts of Mark confirms that the boat's starting to fill up with water. And so this is a pretty rough situation. But it's interesting, the contrast that's drawn between Jesus, who's asleep, and the disciples who are freaking out, particularly because the disciples are Galilean fishermen, at least some of them are. You would think they would know what to do in these situations, and they've been in this type of situation before, yet they're the ones losing their mind, and Jesus is the one who's asleep. Now, we've heard a story before of a servant of God who goes into a boat to cross a body of water, falls asleep, and in the midst of his sleeping, a great storm arises. And I think Luke and the other synoptic gospel writers are intentionally kind of drawing some parallels between the story of Jesus and the story of Jonah. So if you want to hop over to the story of Jonah real quick, keeping your finger there in Luke. In Jonah, chapter 1, as we've talked about in our discussions of Jonah and our discussion of the minor prophets, Jonah is an interesting story here because Jonah, kind of almost in a satirical way, is showing the failures of Israel and showing the failures of Jonah as a prophet by the comparison of him and these pagan sailors. And so in chapter 1, And verse 4, it says that the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea. There was a great storm on the sea, so the ship was about to break up. Similar situation. Then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, lain down, and fallen fast asleep. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you are sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish." And so we see the pagan sailors, who are far more righteous than Jonah in this particular story. Jonah is asleep because he's being portrayed as ignorant. He's being portrayed as oblivious to what God is trying to do, that he's in rebellion against God. And the pagan sailors are portrayed as being aware of what's going on, that they're aware that this is clearly a storm of divine origins. And so to them, the only solution is for this prophet to pray out to his God. Well, in Jesus and the disciples' case, the roles are actually reversed. The disciples are the ones that are freaking out. They're not turning to God's help in this situation. They're freaking out. But Jesus is calm. He's aware that he's protected. He's aware that God is in control of this. He's aware that he has the power to control over this thing. And so when he wakes up, his response is not, "Oh man, I can't believe I've slept through the storm." His response is, "Where is your faith? You've seen me perform miracles of healing. You've seen me cast out demons. Do you think I can't protect you if need be?" And so he turns after rebuking the disciples, and he rebukes the winds and the waves. And Mark actually kind of details that he literally says, "Quiet, be still." And interestingly, that's actually the same terminology that Jesus uses when he's rebuking demons. And it's the same idea of quiet, be still, rebuking the waves and the winds. He rebukes the demons. And so some have argued that this is maybe a demonic storm. I don't think that's the point of what's being used here. I think the point is that just as Jesus has complete control over demons, as he has complete control over spiritual beings, so too does he have complete control over the natural world. And so it's just another way of him showing that he has complete authority over people, he has complete authority over spiritual beings, and he has complete control over the physical creation. And so we see that Jesus, far from the disciples' accusation in Mark, where they ask him, do you not care that we're perishing? Do you not have any sympathy for us who are weak and who are about to die in this? He shows his great love for his disciples, but he also shows his authority as the Son of Man. And it's interesting because the disciples, who are not portrayed very well in this situation, they're portrayed as not having the faith that they require. It's interesting that they respond to this and they say, "Who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?" And I think the reason they have this particular response is that the control over the sea, control over the natural elements, that is very specifically the realm of God. In fact, if you look over in Psalm 107, in verse 28, this is just one example of this imagery of the Lord being in control over seas. It says in verse 28, "They cried to the Lord in their trouble. He brought them out of their distresses. He caused the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed." And so constantly you see the sea is kind of used, especially in the Old Testament, as emblematic of chaos, of the forces of destruction in the world, and the Lord is always in control of them. Actually, the prophet Zephaniah is a really good example of that in the 3rd chapter. But we see that the Lord is in control in this situation. And we see that Jesus is also in control of this situation. And so in Luke's account, as well as Matthew and Mark, this is the disciples kind of growing in their realization of who their teacher is, that he's not just a prophet, he's not just a great and powerful man of God. There's something divine about him. And that kind of progressive revelation is going to grow until finally Peter is the one who makes the connection that, you are the Son of God. And then they still have a while to go after that, because right after that, Peter does his normal thing and kind of oversteps. But this is where we start to see the disciples growing in their understanding. And so we've seen Jesus heal people. We've seen him cast out demons. We've seen him exercising his authority over the scriptures and reinterpreting them over the mistaken interpretations of the Pharisees and scribes. Now we see him having complete control over nature. And so the Gospels are just progressively building this case so that by the end of the Gospel, as you've seen this man doing these miracles, doing these godlike things, and then being resurrected as kind of the final proof of his claim, you're left at the end of the Gospels unable to come to a conclusion other than this was the Son of God, and I need to respond to that. And so we see the Gospels just progressively building that case. And so this calming of the seas, it's an important distinction. It's an important step in that growing gospel narrative. I hope this gives you some things to think about. I hope it gives you some insight, again, into a story that we probably all know pretty well, but some connections to it, some insights into it, and some placing it into the growing narrative of the Gospels. We appreciate so much you continuing to study these things with you. We love you guys. We miss you. We continue to pray for your well-being, for your safety. We cannot wait to resume these studies in person so that we can continue to get that good feedback and good interaction with everybody. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you next time.